Boy oh boy, was this budget small on climate action. Only a miserly $19.3 million was dedicated solely for renewable energy and $30 million for a big battery in the Northern Territory. Compare that to $1.6 billion over 10 years for major polluters to turn their fossil fuels into hydrogen, to try and bury their emissions, to upgrade their equipment and practices, and to meet and beat their agreed but weak emission limits. That's not to mention undisclosed billions for liquid fuel security, which we now know is $2.3 billion to shore up our oil refineries. That's on top of the $8 billion in fuel tax credits. But when it comes to the latest in greenwashing, look no further than the government's clean hydrogen. The PM is keen to make these hydrogen valleys. The problem is it's using fossil fuels to make hydrogen, a process that releases tons of emissions, more than if you just burnt those fossil fuels directly. And the only way you could possibly badge this as clean is with the promise to bury those emissions, at least some of them, underground. Now the problem is that hasn't worked. Carbon capture and storage, the technology to do that, has also received over $250 million, on top of the $50 million from the last budget. They promised to bury the emissions under the carpet, and it hasn't worked. It hasn't worked. There isn't a single commercial CCS facility in this country that's fully operational, despite over $1.3 billion spent by federal and state governments. There's only less than 20 worldwide. CCS has been used as a marketing tool to allow fossil fuels to continue. Now, years ago, the Abbott government created the safeguards mechanism. That's to hold Australia's biggest polluters to certain thresholds. The problem is those thresholds for pollution are really weak. What this budget does is it doesn't tighten those thresholds. No, it allocates $280 million for a new scheme to reward those large emitters with actually meeting and beating those thresholds using transformative abatement projects. Really rewarding them for doing the bare minimum, if not less than that. When it comes to climate impacts, after 18 months of fires and droughts and floods, you'd expect the budget to have something for the frontline communities that are doing it tough. But no. What we have instead is $98 million for dams, $59 million for low emission farming technologies, and nothing really that goes to the heart of climate impacts and adaptation. There is $1.2 billion to build Australia's resilience, but it overlooks the key risk, the one that supercharges all these natural disasters, and that's climate change. So while climate impacts continue to accelerate, everyday Australians continue to foot the bill through property loss, through higher insurance premiums. The big polluters, they get away scot-free. And what we need to do is bring in a levy to charge fossil fuel exports to help pay for those impacts. When it comes to electricity, the budget failed to deliver on two big tasks. One, building new supply. Two, redesigning a reliable grid for when we know coal-fired power stations will retire. But instead, Energy Minister Angus Taylor called for a new subsidy to prop up unprofitable coal-fired power stations. The funding, of course, will be snuck onto your and my energy bills. And the government, of course, has put aside more money for more gas-fired power stations under the shadowy category of decisions taken but not yet announced. Rest assured, it'll all be done, and we'll hear about it when the money is already flowing. There's a lot more money for gas in this budget as well. Under the gas-fired recovery, gas companies will get $300 million in direct subsidies, $55 million for gas-fired power stations, another $59 million for gas infrastructure and hubs, $9 million for a future gas infrastructure planning, and $170 million for roads to help frackers frack in the NT. This is all despite the Australian energy market operators' forecast that there'll be a drop in demand for gas. And by spending all this money, it'll lock Australians into gas for the longer term, which will have implications for our emissions. Overall, this budget has been a disappointment when it comes to climate action. And if we want to see Australia stop its laggard ways, then we need to see it start spending on and investing in the future we all want.